Hey everybody, Dr. Rob Silverman here, Amazon best-selling author of Inside Out Health. Excited to be here. Had a little break in some social media videos. Coming back this week with a whole bunch of videos, short videos with salient points. Today I want to talk about how environmental triggers actually adversely affect your health. Now, it's so hard for so many of you out there, so many of my patients and so many of my colleagues to really avoid the environmental triggers. So environmental triggers speak to the idea of like a toxic chemical. So toxic chemicals are what falls under that category of BPA. Now, BPA is used all the time. It's in plastics. I've got my little pad here. It's in paper. It's in credit card receipts. It's on boarding passes if you're not using your phone. BPA is used throughout the U.S. on any kind of paper type of apparatus. So we're really exposed to a lot of different kinds of BPA throughout the day. Some of the other things, and maybe the biggest one, and this is a live in its own, this is a whole webinar. I'm trying to get an expert on this, glyphosate. So we all know that there's about 93% of the soils now cannot be used for organic. So flip to the other side, there's only 7% that can be used for organic. Glyphosate is in Roundup, and glyphosate may be traced to a tremendous increase in celiac disease, an increase in leaky gut. So these environmental triggers like glyphosate really pose a tremendous issue to people's overall health. Some other things like phthalates, believe it or not, even toothpaste has something called triclosan, which is very deleterious to people's overall health. So we're surrounded by environmental toxins. More so than that, when we think about environmental toxins, we look at the idea or think of the idea of what do they do? Well, they lead to what we call a breakdown in oral tolerance. And really the oral tolerance refers to the idea of what we consume in our mouth or what we consume through our skin that goes through our gut, that leads us down a path of a leaky gut. We've talked about a leaky gut a multitude of times. Leaky gut, or a gut for me, I should say, is the epicenter of your health. 80% of your immune cells are in your gut. It's where your macro and micronutrients are absorbed. So we always want to keep our gut in its pristine condition. These environmental toxins lead to a breakdown in our oral tolerance at our gut level, which ultimately leads to a change in our gut microbiota. What's going on inside? Now, what's going on inside our gut is an ecosystem. There's a multitude of things that live there, bacteria, viruses, even parasites. So when we unsettle, bless you, when we unsettle the gut microbiota, it really leads us to something called a dysbiosis. Dysbiosis is another environmental trigger. Dysbiosis, an unleveling of good and bad bacteria. And that too much bad bacteria leads us to health promoting statuses. Lastly, when you look at the change in the gut microbiota, we also have certain things like infections, like a viral infection. You know, COVID is the big thing right now, of course, bacterial infections. So to recap a little bit, environmental triggers leads to the breakdown in oral tolerance, which change our gut microbiota, which enhance our gut permeability, or if you will, give us leaky gut or increased intestinal permeability. So our gut becomes too large, it becomes too permeable, our filter becomes too big and lets large undigested food particles, which are supposed to go through the small intestine to the large intestine and eliminated, get into the bloodstream. Now, when they get into the bloodstream, unfortunately, that poses an issue in that it leads in the bloodstream to an immune reactivity. So your immune system has a button, actually it has two buttons. And in those two buttons, it presses self or foreign. So obviously this large undigested food particle is not supposed to be there, and our immune system begins to attack it. Heavy attack as more and more food antigens, food particles get through, leads us down a path of what we like to refer to as autoimmunity. The autoimmunity occurs because the immune system gets confused. These food particles or food proteins have what we call a protein sequence, like a zip code. These protein sequences in specific foods are very similar to structures in your body. So for instance, gluten, if it gets through, is very similar to a part of your brain called the cerebellum, and your body begins to attack it. We call that, when your body attacks its own structure, autoimmunity, and ultimately it can attack brainy particles in brainy structures. We call that neural autoimmunity. So one more recap. Environmental triggers lead to a breakdown in oral tolerance, which lead to a change in the gut microbiota, which lead to enhanced gut permeability, i.e. leaky gut, which is also allowing access to your bloodstream to large undigested food particles, which lead you down a path to increased immune reactivity, ultimately leading possibly to autoimmunity and neural autoimmunity. So once again, if you guys have any questions, feel free to reach out. I'm going to be doing a whole bunch this week of quick hit videos with salient topics. Anything you want to hear, please put it in the comment section. I'm Dr. Rob Silverman, always yours in health.